Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. We're just about to start. Hopefully you can find yourself a seat. There's some empty ones in the midst, if possible. All right. Well, we're going to start. Hello, everyone. My name is Colleen Kennedy, and I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Club of Toronto. Welcome. Welcome to Top Hat. Thank you to the team for hosting us here. And we're pleased that you could all join us on this sunny afternoon. But first, I wish to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional lands of many Indigenous peoples over the centuries, most recently the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation, and we are absolutely thankful and grateful to be able to gather on this and meet and learn on this land. So, the fourth industrial revolution is upon us, bringing with it changes to the way we live, work, and play. One of the major areas of disruption is in education, and I think that's why all of you are here today. How do we keep pace with the needs of an evolving marketplace where training needs are changing as fast as the technology? Collaboration, competition, and partnership are key aspects of the response, and you'll hear more from our distinguished panel in a minute. First, I'm excited to share some information about our upcoming events. On Friday, we have a breakfast with the Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, who will be sharing some of their economic plans for the future. And on Thursday, March 26th, we welcome Jeff Smith, the President and CEO of Ellis Dawn, who will be speaking about the company's commitment to entrepreneurial excitement. He actually used the word lunacy when I was speaking to him, and where they are going to the future, which is selling the company back to their employees. So it will be a really exciting event where he'll talk a little bit more about that plan. So we hope to see you. So now it's time for our business card draw. Thanks to those of you who have dropped it off. Jake, hopefully you'll draw a name for us. And the winner will receive a 1-year subscription to The Logic, Canada's best source for in-depth reporting on the innovation economy. If you haven't checked it out, it's a really informative thing. Are you ready?
There is Keith Hampson.
Congratulations, Keith.
Keith Hampson here, congrats.
Oh, there he is.
There we go.
We'll get you the subscription.
Cheers.
Thanks. So as a nonprofit, we count on sponsors to help with our mission. And we are grateful for Pearson today for sponsoring today's important event. We are truly grateful for your support, and thanks for being here in the room. Thanks, Pearson. And now to the content. Our club is always looking for ways to keep pace with the changes around us. And now that we're more connected online than ever before, we think it's so important to gather together in person to talk about the important issues of the day. Many of us had to make investments to keep pace with the changing needs of the workplaces. Education and training are critically important to preparing the workforce of the future. How can we be entrepreneurial in our approach to addressing Canada's skill challenges? That's what we'd like to know from some of the country's most respected ed tech leaders, and here they are. Jeremy Auger. Jeremy is the Chief Strategy Officer at D2L. He drives company-level strategy and provides executive leadership in key service areas. Jeremy has been actively involved in starting and running transformative tech companies for over 20 years and is an advisor to the Government of Canada on future skills. Carlos Mesa. Carlos is a Chief Executive Officer at Cavuto Solutions, the leading provider of digital resource distribution and management solutions for the education industry. He has been focused on leading Cavuto's transition from a family business to a professional corporation. Carlos brings 15 years of experience in corporate finance, management, and technology to his CEO role. Marlene Olsavsky. Marlene is the Managing Director of Pearson in Canada, a subsidiary of the world's leading learning company with more than 24,000 employees operating in 70 countries. Marlene has spent the majority of her career in executive leadership positions in education technology, where she has led companies through digital transformation. Mike Siligadze. Mike is the CEO and founder of Top Hat, where we are today, the Canadian scale-up that provides the active learning platform for higher education. Under his leadership and vision, Top Hat has become the market leader in student engagement software, which is used by millions of students at the majority of top North American colleges and universities. And moderating today's conversation is Jake Hirsch-Allen, a director of our club. Jake is the higher learning lead for LinkedIn in Canada, North America, and lynda.com. He works with public and private sector organizations to leverage LinkedIn's learning solutions and data to close skill gaps. So they will take questions near the end, so please be sure to think of them. We're going to use a live mic, so put your hands up and we'll come in and get your questions. So with that, Jake and panelists, the Canadian Club Toronto podium is now yours.
Thanks so much. Well, I wanted to start by thanking everybody for coming because this honestly feels like family. I think I know about half the room, and I expect all of you know another half of the room. So it's wonderful to have Toronto, even Canada's EdTech community in one place. And it's really wonderful to have this panel coming together with Pearson sponsoring us in order to really have an honest conversation about how we can both help each other and in some ways compete with each other. So I wanted to begin, and this is the only mention of LinkedIn I promise I'll make all day, by actually having everybody in the room connect with those who you're not connected to. Do you all know the Find Nearby function? How many people have the LinkedIn app on their phone? All right, we got some. All right, so if you go into the LinkedIn app, and for those on stage, you guys are off the hook. And then you go to My Network at the bottom. You'll see a little blue button on the right. And once you're there, put your hands up again. Got about a third. And keep your hands up. Got about half. All right. Once you click on that blue button, click on Find Nearby. It'll tell you to turn Bluetooth on. And then you'll find everybody else in the room who's just done the same thing. And you can connect with them. All right, let's get back to the questions as you're doing that. So I wanted to kick this off and make it relatively informal, but also keep it interesting enough that we are actually on our toes. The panelists are aware of most of the questions, not all of them. And I'll start by directing questions to specific panelists and giving them about a minute to answer. So we're going to try to keep it quick to begin, and then we'll get into a much larger free-flowing conversation, including with questions from you all. So for Marlene, Carlos, and Mike, what's a textbook?
Ladies first, okay.
Yeah.
So a textbook, I think textbooks have served many of us well in this room. They're a teaching and learning tool, but as the learning landscape has changed with the digital times, the market's really shifting towards digital courseware. And digital courseware is immersive, peer-reviewed instructional content combined with assessment powered by technology and services.
Perfect, thank you. One paragraph.
You said a minute. I could
Yeah,
go on
that was
for
even
five,
less.
but
I think
yeah,
that was
okay.
30 seconds. Mike?
I think I agree with a lot of that. I mean, our perspective at Top Hat is that the traditional textbook is dead, or it's sort of a zombie that's still walking around. But over the next 5-10 years, what many of us, myself included, I'm sure most of you guys, used in your higher education experience, in your secondary, post-secondary experience, that learning experience is going to be gone. The students that are entering university or even high school today have a dramatically different expectation about their learning experience. When they want to learn something outside of a traditional educational setting, they have the ability to make that learning experience personalized for their needs, right? If you want to learn something today, you want to learn how to put up drywall, you don't open up a textbook. You look up a YouTube video. You check Wikipedia. You check the myriad of resources that are available to you to make that experience personalized to you. And then, unfortunately, when those same students go into most educational institutions today, they find the experience that they get there to be dramatically at odds with that expectation that they've got in the rest of their life. And our goal at Top Hat is to bring that experience and expectation into alignment, to get rid of those traditional learning experiences, to make the learning experience more interactive, more engaging, and to finally to put the final nail in the coffin of the traditional textbook and transform it into an interactive, personalized learning experience. So, which is fundamentally what Top Hat creates that actually transcends just the courseware, that it actually includes the in-class experience, it includes the out-of-class experience, it includes the way students are assessed, and the way all of that is brought together, both in university and eventually in K-12. So that's our perspective on textbooks.
I got to cut you off, and it's really hard cutting the host off, particularly when he's saying all the right things, but thank you. I think that was, again, completely in line with Marlene's, but also in line with certainly my thinking on textbooks. Carlos, how about you?
I think there's very interesting points for both. In my opinion, textbook is just a concept. It's just a piece of content that is used to learn, right? I think the concept of the traditional book as a piece of paper, a little brick that people haul around, is maybe what is behind. But I think at the end, how we think in Kibudo is that for us, at the end, a textbook, an electronic textbook, is ones and zeros. It's another piece of technology today. But I think as a learning tool, you can be hardware, can be paper, or it can be software. But now there's a combination of both, and I know probably Marlene would agree with that, right? So you have the physical piece and the electronic piece that complement each other. And I think it will continue to evolve, but the concept will always be the same. It's a piece of content that you use to learn something.
Awesome. Thank you. So moving into that technical world and something that's, I think, pure software, what's the learning management system, Jeremy? What's an LMS?
I'm glad you asked, Jake. So, I mean, the learning management system, it's been around for a while. It's had a few different names. Like, if you went back 20 years, they'd call it a course management system. Other parts of the world might call it a virtual learning environment or a distributed learning platform.
Yeah.
We tend to refer to it as a learning platform. And that's largely because it's moved, thanks. It's moved quite a ways beyond just managing learning.
Totally.
And today, we look at the platform as really being able to help improve learning. So, obviously, you would use it for things like curating and creating content and delivering that content. You use it, there's grade books that integrate with other enterprise systems. There's assessment tools. There's, communication and collaboration tools to help better engage students and teachers and parents, and all those things. But once you introduce this platform into an educational environment, whether that be blended or fully online, you really start to generate interesting data that wouldn't otherwise be generated. And so that data can, as you get into more advanced tools, can start to allow you to do things like predictive analytics to identify performance trends and risk factors for students. You can also use it for things like adaptive learning, which can then tailor and customize individualized pathways through content and experiences for students. Maybe skipping over things students have already mastered, and focusing more on things that they still need to achieve. And so really giving a personalized experience to each individual learner on a pathway to the same outcomes as their peers. So really we look at it as a way to leverage what teachers do every day at scale, help personalize individual learning pathways and learning experiences to improve outcomes.
Thank you. So a lot of people are sort of moving from this term LMS, and in fact, I hadn't heard some of the older terms from an LMS for a while now, so thank you for the brief history. And they're moving into a new realm that many call learning experience platforms. I've heard at least 2 of the panelists, maybe 3 or 4 of the panelists' platforms occasionally referred to as such, maybe not by you, but certainly by others. And so I'm curious, Mike, Jeremy, feel free, Marlene and Carlos to chime in as well. What is a learning experience platform? Is what you're building one? How does that relate to an LMS or a textbook?
So I can give my perspective. I don't know if I've got the complete view. It seems like the term learning experience platform has emerged out of the corporate learning space, where the LMS, as it's used and has been developed for the higher education or secondary space, it's not quite the right product. There's not so much these fixed courses that you deliver in the corporate learning environment. Instead, you have this almost kind of repository of content that people can pick and choose from, and that's what people are talking about as this learning experience platform. That's not what Top Hat is at all. Like, we're in a totally different category. We look at ourselves as being in the active learning courseware space, which is, our focus right now is entirely higher education, and then eventually moving into K-12.
Helpful, thank you.
Yeah, so totally agree. So the learning experience platform, or LXPs, kind of emerged in the corporate space. And a lot of it was because the LMS that you'd see in education is very different than the LMS you'd see in a corporate environment. LMSs in the corporate environment are very much analogous to a student information system in education. They're much more designed to be kind of a back-end HR system to track compliance and professional development and things like that. Sometimes they have a learning module, right?
Sure.
So LXPs were really emerged to solve for the problem of discovery in the corporate space. So how do I find a learning experience on X, whether that be a course or an article or videos or something like that? As we look at, so those legacy LMSs in the corporate space kind of needed that new front end to support discovery. As we look at next gen LMSs, like D2Ls or Brightspace, a lot of the functionality you'd find in those LXPs has now been subsumed in kind of these modern LMSs. And so they kind of blend a combination of what you'd see in traditional ones with some of this new front-end functionality. And a lot of that has come out of the education space, and companies are really looking for that more advanced learning-centric model as opposed to more of a compliance and tracking model.
Okay, so maybe the last question on like the actual products that we're talking about or the content that we're talking about is, where do you all see the overlaps and contrasts or non-overlaps between the products that each of you make? And maybe let's start with Carlos and move to Marlene after that.
Sure. We're an interesting part because we're a little bit more on the back end. I think we would have a little bit more overlaps with the learning management system, but I guess the good thing is that the learning management system is more on the front end, is where the student resides, and we are kind of, I would say, a little bit of the piping. So we help central IT with the business rules, compliance, and management of resources. But actually, we integrate with LMS all the time. So we plug in and we help with the delivery. I think they do some of the things that we would do, but we are more, our strength is on the back end. So there is overlap, but it really is more collaboration than overlap.
Super helpful. Thank you. How about you, Marlene? I mean, I think Pearson.
Well, our focus at Pearson is really on developing immersive learning and teaching experiences. So using adaptive technologies, AI, and we're working with partners like Cavuto on content distribution. A couple of years back, we actually partnered with Algonquin College, Cavuto, and Pearson, and another player in the market, Nelson Canada. We worked together to build a new content service, distribution service called Texidium. So we've partnered in deep ways around that. With D2L, it's about integration, and Mike and I just compete.
Care to elaborate?
Maybe one day. Well, there's one day we might come together. But
I mean, Nelson and you came together, so.
Yeah, no, that's right. I like to segment at least the higher education space, the businesses that are serving the higher education space, by who the primary customer and decision maker is. That's really, if you divide up companies by who their decision maker or customer is, you really start to see that sort of bifurcation. So for us, the decision maker in virtually all cases is the educator, the professor, faculty member. They're the ones that are making the decision to adopt Top Hat, to embrace this sort of suite of tools to create an active learning environment in their course. With an LMS, typically the decision maker is the administrator, the CIO, the IT person. So what that means is although there is an overlap, like a 20% overlap between what Top Hat does and what an LMS traditionally does, that overlap is really there to kind of reduce friction and more around integration. Like we integrate really tightly with the learning management system. But our goal, as I said, is to empower the educator to give them the tools to create more of that active learning experience throughout the life cycle of the course. And yes, Pearson, Pearson is definitely in that same category as us.
Helpful. So no panel would be complete these days without the use of the word future at least 10 times. So I'm going to try to squeeze at least 2 in right now. What does the future of skills development look like? And specifically, if we're focusing on the student space, since most of you all do that a lot of the time,
right,
how do we better prepare students in a state where, if you read the news today or yesterday, there's a lot of debate about what that future should look like or currently is how it's being prepared right now?
Yeah, I could start. I think, to me, the 40-year career is dead, right? So people are going to still have careers, but they're going to transition roles and between industries more often. And the degree they earn when they're 20 years old isn't going to carry them through for success. And so we're already seeing learners take control over their own learning experiences through short courses, a mix of finding things on the internet, through LinkedIn, to really upskill, reskill, retrain. And so I think the future really is around developing those experiences with high fidelity to give learners more access to help through those transitions. Secondly, I'll say that all the research points to the things that make us uniquely human: collaboration, creativity, problem solving, critical thinking. Those are the things that are going to make us more employable. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a real opportunity to rethink education, even from a very young age, K-12 preschool. how do we build those skills so we can equip ourselves and our children for success in the future?
Super helpful.
So I'd like to build upon that. So I see a few things. One is the concept of lifelong learning. I think building on what Marlene is saying about the 4-year career is dead. So we're going to be learners for life. And that means that we're going to probably get out of high school, and then we're going to take micro-credentials. Probably some of you have heard of those terms, and then keep coming back because technology changes so quickly that we just need to be updating our skills all the time. And the other point is going to be about customization. So every time the experiences are going to be more customized for each learner, depending on their abilities, how they learn, and at what pace. And the third thing I think is going to be about a blended experience. So it's going to be a very high degree of combination between the physical world and the virtual world, right? So we're going to be taking classes from our home, but we're also going to be still going to physical spaces. I think there's going to be, it's not going to go full, in my opinion, not going to go full virtual, but I think with AR and VR, there's going to be, the experience is going to be way more blended.
Is there a role that Kivuto plays in that blended environment?
Yeah, as the world moves more into technology, we help to make sense of this world. So the more technology the institutions adopt, we help them to make sense of that. 10 years ago, an institution would only adopt 10 pieces of technology. Today is 300, and they have maybe the same resources. They don't have 30 times the resources, so we facilitate the management of those resources.
Okay, helpful. I mean, it's actually probably an interesting question for everybody up here, which is, if you had to specify as accurately and quickly as possible how you're facilitating the in-person experience, not the online experience, what is it that you offer that actually makes that human interaction more valuable or more effective?
Yeah, I can certainly talk about that. That's, for the early part of Top Hat's history, going back now 6-7 years, that was pretty much, that's what we started with, is facilitating that interaction engagement in the classroom. The trend that we're seeing across, and this is speaking to university presidents, provosts, folks that are trying to transform their universities to the next stage, is everyone is trying to sort of kill the sage on the stage model of delivering content of education. In other words, no one wants to have faculty members just stand there kind of lecturing at students. The value of that has just diminished over the years because it can just be replicated pretty easily. So what people are moving towards is this model called the flipped classroom, or variations of that, where students consume the lecture material, the content outside of the traditional classroom on their own time, and then in classroom time is dedicated to really leveraging the benefits of a subject matter expert, the faculty member, through discussion and really deep engagement with them and their fellow students. And that's what Top Hat is all about. That's really the core technology that we've built to facilitate that kind of interaction engagement, which I think has to be the future of higher education if it's to stay relevant. No one's going to go to university to pay $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year to get the equivalent of a YouTube video or a video they can watch on Coursera or Udacity.
Yeah, I mean, this idea that you can learn a human skill from a computer doesn't, by definition, make sense, right? The computer can facilitate the learning of a human or essential or soft skill, but actually those have to be learned and evaluated probably forever by people. Jeremy?
Yeah, so I think there's huge value technology can bring generally to face-to-face experiences by doing things like automating administrative tasks, saving time for instructors and students, facilitating things like flipped classroom where the time spent by the humans in the equation is actually high-value teaching and learning activities as opposed to administrative, single sign-ons and lecturing from the front every, the same lecture every semester, things like that.
Totally.
To bring that back to this future of work question, which relates both to face-to-face and to online, is this idea that the need for lifelong learning and continuous upskilling through a career or set of careers over time is becoming not just nice to have, but mandatory. And so the problem we have is that our systems of education that we've invested in for the last 300 years in this country aren't well adapted to that new reality. They're very well adapted to the progression through formal schooling, K-12, maybe higher education or trade or something like that, apprenticeship, and then you go to work and then you retire and you knit. I don't knit, but some people knit.
Some people knit.
That kind of phases of life is going to get scrambled up, right? And it's going to be much more cyclical, or what the term that we're using now is this idea of having a learning integrated life, so that you're learning throughout life continuously and ongoing. And so our institutions of education aren't necessarily well prepared to participate as well as they could, and there's a huge opportunity for them to do so in that new upskilling world and that lifelong learning world. So what technology can bring to that environment as well is new models of education, flexibility, kind of, whether that be online or face-to-face. In online, obviously, you can start to provide things like on-demand, anytime, anywhere learning on any device, right? So, we've got great examples around the world. In South Africa, where, for example, agri-colleges and this institution there is delivering leadership and agricultural training to farmers in rural South Africa that have no other access to a physical location, right? And they're taking it all through their smartphones and getting credentials and, growing their businesses or moving into management, things like that. So we take that examples from around the world, and we think about it here, it's just as applicable. Whether you're, sitting at your desk and you need to fit learning into your regular day with other commitments. But to help transition to some of these new models, education needs support, and technology can be some of that support. So things like competency-based education, where individuals are individually assessed on mastery of competencies as opposed to the amount of seat time that they've experienced, right? So this shift towards starting to look at actually measuring learning as opposed to how long you've been sitting in a chair needs to shift, and our system is entrenched with old models that need to shift. Technology can be a huge play in helping to adapt to some of those things.
Helpful. One of the interesting recent developments in Canada following Singapore and France and a bunch of other countries is this idea of a national skills benefit or training credit or training benefit. And what you're describing in some ways fits into that, right? The idea that the government will help somebody integrate learning throughout their life and do so financially and otherwise. I'm curious if any of you all are actually responding to that training benefit by partnering with institutions that offer education or are going to make another play vis-a-vis that funding.
I'll comment briefly, just not specifically related to that funding, but the spirit of that funding is in line with what we're seeing emerge with many of our customers. So because we work in K-12 higher ed and the corporate space, we're seeing interesting opportunities at the intersection of those segments. And so you've probably started to hear a lot of these partnerships emerging between large companies especially and higher education institutions where they'll pay for education, whether it's Starbucks or Walmart or places
IBM.
like this. So we're working on a really interesting one with FedEx and the University of Memphis, where FedEx in some of their shipping depots, they'll have 20,000 employees in a shipping depot, relatively low-skilled workers, and they were seeing turnover rates of these employees of like 96%. So think about that if you're trying to run a company and almost 100% of your staff turnover every year. Massive cost. And they had an education program where they would fund $5,000 of education for their employees, and no one was taking advantage of it.
Wow.
So a lot of what they figured out was that we helped them put this partnership together with the University of Memphis, where they built a very specific, fully online, fully flexible, competency-based program for FedEx employees. They call it LIFE, which is Learning Inspired by FedEx. And so now what their employees can do.
Quite a life.
Yeah.
I like it.
If there's nothing inspires me like getting my packages on time. But so employees basically are coming from hugely varied backgrounds, right? Some have high school, some were dropouts, some have part of higher ed, and some others have other degrees. But so they have this internal kind of level setting to get you prepared to go back to education, and then they have a full degree program that can be taken online. It's fully paid for outside, so it's not a reimbursement situation, which was a barrier for some of these employees. So they built this partnership that now from the ideation stage to when they launched was 5 months, which is really, really fast. And in their first cohort, they had 4,000 enrollments of employees. So if you think about that, if you're a higher ed institution, the investment and time it takes to get 4,000 more students is huge, and they did that in 5 months with one program. And for FedEx, every person who has engaged in these learning experiences is still with the company, right? You know, a year, 18 months
new
later.
lease on life.
So the cost that they were spending on, their life is now inspired by FedEx, right? So, but what they're seeing is that all the costs they were spending on replenishing this staff base every year is basically a wash with what they're spending on education.
Sure.
But just a flip of the model, more flexibility and more engaging was able to turn around that problem they're trying to solve around retention.
It's a great example.
Yeah.
It was also a good dodge. But
Thank you.
does anybody else give?
Well, we're not building directly for the federal training credit, but we are building for customers who are trying to respond to that. So, you know, Pearson's got an evolving portfolio of workforce solutions. We've just released 70 online courses that lead to certification. We're partnering with players like Credly to do digital batting and certification. What we're seeing, the demand in that space goes back to what I was talking about earlier, is microbyte. People don't want to go back to school for 4 years. That's typically what the research is showing us. So how do we respond in meaningful ways? How do these institutions respond and pivot and build tiny degree programs, micro-credentialing, micro-computing? So that's where we see as the sweet spot. I did want to go back, if I may, because you talked a lot about the flipped classroom, and we started to talk about employability. I think the space that the flipped classroom creates for us, too, is to bring more work-integrated learning experiences into the actual classroom. And there's a couple companies in Canada already doing really great things. Ripen, I think people from Ripen are here today. They're doing work-integrated learning projects. So they're going out to employers and they're sourcing projects that students can actually work on either in the classroom or through an integrated delivery online. We're also working with a company called Dimitros Learning, which is a Canadian ed tech startup here in Toronto. And they're doing some really great things leveraging AI to build simulations so students can actually simulate and work on projects within the classroom of what they might actually do when they're in the workplace. So I think it's important we do both.
Amazing. There's a bunch of different ways that we all currently integrate. Each of our companies actually work with each other. I'm wondering if you can highlight a couple of specific examples where you already integrate with somebody else on the panel, and then maybe one where you compete with somebody else on the panel.
Yeah, I can take that, Jake. So we integrate with all LMSs through LTI. There's a technology standard, so don't want to bore anybody here with nerd stuff. But there's a standard, so we integrate into D2L or into any other LMS, and we would to deliver Pearson content. So we would use our technology to deliver the content. I would integrate into LMS, so a student goes into LMS, click a book, and we're the ones doing the delivery in the back. And because we're integrated with the platform, it's seamless, so the student doesn't know we're shaking hands all around. Mm-hmm. Awesome. I don't work with Jake yet, but we do OERs as well, so there's probably opportunity to
Thank you. So maybe we're going to broker one of those connections.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and I
Yes,
think.
sorry.
Go ahead. Yep.
Similarly, so in the same way we integrate with the learning management system that serves as a base, it's sort of like all the information about students, their enrollments, their courses is really stored in the LMS. And so Top Hat similarly integrates with the learning management in terms of rosters, grades, feeding content. And we're happy to do that. I think there's a tremendous opportunity that is available around sharing data, in particular, to be able to impact better student outcomes, as I think you mentioned. And then on the competitive side, I think although Top Hat, Pearson, other companies in this space, there's certainly a competitive element there. I think there's such a dramatic transformation happening in the market where this entire, this courseware space, which is about a $10 billion market in North America alone, $35 billion worldwide. I mean, it's much larger than, in fact, most people realize. That's just dollars that students are spending on their course materials. That market is undergoing a dramatic transformation where it's still really, if you truly measure it, it's still majority paper. And all of that is rapidly shifting towards digital courseware, interactive learning materials, what we all know to be the future of this space. So all of us are trying to do the same thing. All of us are trying to move from this legacy model to digital interactive courseware and learning materials. So although there's some element of competition, I think we're all trying to get to the same space. Most of our work has to do with getting faculty members, getting the customers to accept it, figuring out a way to actually get them on board with this new model of teaching, which can be challenging sometimes. Which in that sense, we're helped by Pearson and anybody else, that's fighting that same fight.
Totally.
So I view it as we're all trying to pull in the same direction.
Jeremy?
Yeah, so the question of competition is really an interesting one because a lot has changed over the last, call it 10 or 15 years. So when you wanted to, so 10 or 15 years ago, if you wanted to do, say, an integration between an LMS platform and a learning app or some content or something like that, you needed some single sign-on functionality. That required a customer to go to 2 vendors, get them to work together, ensure there was some sort of partnership there, which probably had some contracting and agreements happening. You'd probably have to, once you could do that, you engage with them probably with a statement of work, probably $5,000 to $10,000 and 6 or 8 weeks of effort, and you could have a single sign-on integration, right? And that's how it worked.
Minimum.
And what came about was this idea. Educause in the U.S., which is more of a higher ed kind of association, put up this white paper on something called the NGDLE, which is the Next Generation Digital Learning Environment, and their vision for what that would look like. And the idea behind it, the Cole's notes of that is that the idea is you'd have a platform, and then you could assemble your learning experiences through different apps and content, kind of like Lego blocks that you just assemble yourself, and you get exactly what you wanted.
Plug and play.
Plug and play, just like USB cables, but for software. I sat on the board of IMS, the Global Learning Consortium, for the last 12 years, which is the standards body that builds these standards that make these things interconnect between edtech software. And so that vision for NGDLE really drove this adoption of standards across all the tech vendors. And so what that shifted, the dynamic that shifted in terms of who competes and who collaborates, is it's almost out of our hands now, right? So a customer can now literally in a matter of seconds integrate 2 solutions if they both support these standards and kind of plug and play and create the learning experience they want. So it's really shifted this idea of like who competes and who doesn't. Half the time we don't even know. I might work with all these guys today and not know about it because I don't have to because of the support from standards. So it's really shifted.
Carlos, were you going to jump in?
No, just I think it's just we have moved from an era of individual stacks to an era of ecosystem, right? So we all play a little bit of a role. You work for Microsoft, right? LinkedIn is part of Microsoft, and Microsoft has opened up their platform so everybody can collaborate. They're competing products to Microsoft within their platform,
Totally.
and customers can come and like Jeremy was saying, come in and build their experience. So I think that's the new world with open platforms like Azure and Google and Amazon. So that's where we're all going, and we're all working together.
So what's interesting is most of our platforms are open in some ways and closed in others. And I think that's always going to be true to some extent, either driven by the need to monetize or simply technical limitations. But practically speaking, when somebody asks me who my top competitor is, it's almost always a free resource. YouTube for online videos, Wikipedia for textbooks. How do you compete with free?
Well, I think OER is innovative, right? So, and the market is large enough. There's a space for many types of resources in the ecosystem. I think the challenge with OER is it's got limited funding, right? So there's only so much government funding or whatever funding model you're using to support OER. And so we really win when people need a deeper type of a learning experience, more robust assessment, more personalized learning technologies that drive a deeper level of engagement. So it's there. In many cases, we have a lot of faculty that are using OER content with our assessment resources. So they're experimenting in new ways as the landscape's shifting.
So let's get a little more controversial. Lecce sort of eased the tension yesterday, most people think, by making an announcement.
Right.
I was out of town, so Marlene, thank you for reminding me about it, and I read up right before this panel. But how are you all responding? I know D2L is very embedded in Ontario's education system. I expect actually everybody up here is involved in one way or another. How are you responding to that?
Yeah, I guess I can comment on that. So our product is used in both a blended and an online way currently in all 72 boards across the province of Ontario. And in fact, our product was developed and evolved over the last 10 plus years with heavy input globally, but very specifically from Ontario teachers who spend a lot of time with us influencing our roadmap and things like that. So we have a lot of experience in partnering with teachers in the province to build our platform. I think I don't want to comment on some of the political aspects of how this is rolled out with the idea of kind of online learning in Ontario. It's already happening in Ontario at quite a number of different school boards. And I think what maybe got lost in a lot of the dialogue was the benefit that online learning can bring, right? So when we think about what we can do with online learning in the province, the idea of improved access, for example. We think about rural and remote communities, and we talk a lot about schools closing and things like that. A lot of that is because of a lack of course access, right? So students can't get access to all of the teachers and courses that they need. So the idea of using online learning to complement what's available in person, face-to-face, with online versions of courses that are still taught by certified Ontario teachers just online is a huge benefit that can be brought to some of these.
Maxime, I think, is in the room from
Yeah,
Contact
Maxime,
North, and I think it's a world-leading example of exactly what you just described.
Exactly. And so we think about things like that. We think about the idea of breaking down barriers for students with disabilities. The idea of our world-leading position on accessibility of our product allows for students with disabilities to gain access to education that they wouldn't otherwise necessarily have access to. And I think a very timely topic right now is the idea of online learning as business continuity infrastructure for education, right? We just heard this morning, Italy announced that they're probably shutting down all their schools, right? And I see in the same paragraphs the idea of them thinking about telelearning. And I'm like, uh-oh. You're just starting to think about this,
Television,
right? Yeah, exactly. So I think there's a huge amount of benefits that online learning can bring to complement what's done face-to-face, as it's done already across the province and around the world, both in blended and fully online. And I think the key thing is that it's not something that you just turn on and it happens. We need to invest in the right infrastructure. We need to partner with teachers. We need to invest in teachers' professional development, make sure everyone's prepared with the tools and the investments and the support that they need to do it right. And so it can be successful. Like any technology usage, it can be a flop. It has to be supported properly.
Lecce's got to take a cue from you, is what you're saying.
Happy to help. Happy to help, yeah.
So why don't we open it up to the floor? We've got a mic up here. Who's got the first question?
Hi, my name is Jessica from Metrics, and thanks for your contribution so far. This is a question about how the move towards more self-directed or lifelong learning. And I've read a little bit, and even when I think of LinkedIn, not to shine a spotlight on the moderator, but with the CEO stepping down to focus on diversity, that there are inherent socioeconomic challenges with self-directed learning, and I'm wondering if any of you are addressing that, and if so, how?
Great question. So just so everybody got it, the question is whether online learning, ed tech, is exacerbating some socioeconomic and diversity challenges. I mean, I can explain how we've done it,
I'm
but
happy to
yeah,
comment
you got it? Go for it.
Yeah, so we see this challenge around the world, right? So there's a bunch of things that need to be in place. I think what's been confused sometimes around online learning is that it's self-directed necessarily, and it isn't necessarily self-directed. So I think that's kind of a separate issue. But we have a challenge around things like broadband access, right? I mean, Canada's really well positioned globally in terms of our access. I think people that have internet access in Canada is something around 96.7% or something like that with internet access. But some rural and remote communities still have challenges. So in my opinion, broadband access should be a human right. Given our current and future economies, people without it are quickly, there's a gap forming, a digital divide, and it's not just for learning, it's also for things like commerce and access to information and collaboration and communication that the rest of the world has the benefit of. So I think that's the first thing is we need good access to broadband. The second is devices, and that tends to be the next challenge. We've seen programs around the world, a lot in the US actually, with one-to-one programs, for example, in schools where everyone gets a device of some sort. There's been really good success stories there and some failures there. And the ones that failed were usually where they rolled out devices and just thought that was the end of it. Everything will be better, and that's not true. So there needs to be other types of professional development and enablement. There needs to be services to layer on top of those devices, like what Brightspace offers with digital learning. And then there needs to be effective instruction and training and professional development for teachers to be able to leverage these technologies. So when I talk about the right conditions and the right supports, those are the types of things that need to be solved for. And we look at those not as reasons not to do it, but barriers that need to be overcome on a path to achieving it.
It's really interesting that you mentioned it as a human right, specifically broadband in this case. I've got a human rights background, and I've been hearing a lot from folks talking about access to water on reserves as an example versus access to broadband. They would rather have access to broadband than water, and I find that a shocking idea. I think it's probably coming from people who've never not had access to water.
Or maybe they think they can order it on Amazon.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. The broadband will help with the water.
Yeah.
But more practically, I do think we are coming to a point where we're starting to reevaluate the ranking of rights and of sort of where education and access to it fits, and maybe even increasing the importance of access to education and access to technology. And I think that will play a really interesting role as we move forward. I'm curious specifically on the diversity question, though,
Yeah.
if you all have more to comment.
I mean,
No, go ahead.
I mean, Jeremy, I think you answered that question very well, but I also think about, on diversity and equity, and technology has the opportunity to remove bias from education as well. And, when I was listening to the question, I was thinking about one of the things that Pearson's really active right now is in the area of English language proficiency. And we're in high stakes testing, and we have a completely digital-based program that's powered by machine learning and AI. So an individual would take a language test on the computer, but it's always scored by the computer as well. So it doesn't, the scoring's not giving a bias towards accents, or if the scorer has a bad mood that day, you're not, letting that creep into the scoring process. So I think in some regards, as we get more advanced with ed technologies, we could actually leverage technology to make it more genderless, unbiased when it comes to things like assessment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say we've certainly seen the same thing. As I reflect on courses, universities where Top Hat is being used, I can think of so many examples where previously students that would have been disadvantaged, students that maybe are commuting to campus, because they're part-time students, they're working, would not be able to have the same level of engagement and interaction with either their courseware, their professors, their fellow students, were it not for technology. Previously, many of these students who had dropped out, now they're able to have that same level of community and feeling through tools like Top Hat, and I'm sure many others, that gives them that sense of connection, and creates much more of a comparable experience to students that are on campus. Similarly, as we all know, different people have different learning styles. Some people have more of a visual learning style. Some people are introverted. Some people are extroverted. And technology is one of the best tools you can use to level the playing field for all of those different learning styles and styles of engagement. With tools, again, I'll focus on Top Hat. Like Top Hat, whether it's with the courseware that the students are engaging in, or in the in-class experience, being able to bring the best out of everybody is so essential to be able to make higher education relevant to the broadest population that we can. So I think technology serves as a really powerful tool towards leveling that playing field.
Yeah, for me, so accessibility is a big one, right? So
Yeah.
one of our tools allows for read aloud and people, visually impaired that in the past wouldn't have access to that, of course. The other impact is on population that are adult learners that couldn't attend school because they're working learners. So we have a case of a college in the U.S. They have 80,000 students, and 80% of their population are immigrants or working moms, people that it doesn't have enough time to attend school, so it's giving more access to education, so it's leveling the play field. And lastly, I think just removing costs from the system allows the educational institutions to serve more people, right, by making more efficient, because the reality is that cost of physical education continues to increase, so how many institutions are coping with that is by moving some virtual, because it's just cheaper than build buildings and desks and et cetera. So removing costs, accessibility, and just access to other population.
Thank you. I was at a panel on Friday. It was a sort of small event with our Minister of Employment and Social Development, our Deputy Minister for Disability, and Microsoft's Head of Accessibility Worldwide. One was blind, one was deaf, one was a paraplegic. And technology allowed all of us to have a completely fluid conversation. And so I think on inclusion from an accessibility standpoint, that resonates with everything you all just said. It has definitely dramatically improved it. On the other hand, I was thinking about the question specifically almost being cultural as well. And when you think of how our minds work, so to speak, in part they've been trained by a Western, linear, philosophical background. And you could imagine, say, an indigenous individual who's from a background that learns and communicates differently, being challenged, I think, in using almost any of the software and the technology that we create. Any ideas on how to sort of grow inclusion beyond accessibility to cultural?
I think, I think with any of these things, we need to do more research, right? So we need to do more research. We need to then use that research to inform, what kind of outcomes are we going to be trying to improve? Is it employability skills, teaching and learning skills? What is it? And then use outcomes-based design and continue to reiterate and build metrics around whether or not we're reaching those goals. I don't think we've cracked that nut yet, but I definitely think this is something that requires a lot more research.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I'll just make a comment around educational technology and this theme of data. As much as privacy concerns are absolutely relevant and things that we need to take seriously, the power of collecting a ton of data, with Top Hat or D2L or or Pearson systems, the beauty of these broad sort of centralized systems that can collect data from millions of participants and then aggregate that data and gain insights about what works for different type of learning styles or different groups. That's what actually allows us to make progress on these challenges. Whereas previously, you put something out there, you're getting no feedback because it's all in these separate pockets in different schools, different individuals' hands. And so that learning feedback cycle is so much faster now because of the centralization and data that we're able to collect. I know certainly for us, I mean, that's a tremendous influence on our product roadmap in terms of what we build, how we try to create a more inclusive product. So I think that's just an awesome change that's happened over the last 10 to 15 years that's not really recognized, I would say, I guess, balancing it with the privacy concerns and so on.
Thanks, Mike. Let's go back to the audience. At least one more. Let's do 2 more questions. I'm going to keep people in their seats.
I'm finding the discussion very exciting. I sit on a school board. As you think about the world that you see, either the structural impediments by the participants, they call it the management structure in universities and secondary schools, and then the teachers who are wedded to a certain set of skills, so that there's a transformation required of the structure as well as the interface. And Top Hat really works at the client interface. How do we evolve that quickly and catch up with you?
Great question. So how do we evolve? I think the question is how do we evolve the human side, the structure from an administrative and system standpoint, as opposed to the technological side. Is that right?
So I'll say that because we primarily focus on the educator, the frontline kind of educators, they've been great. I mean, teachers are so willing to adopt and try new technologies, try new ways of teaching. So much of what we're doing is just driven by that experience. Where the evolution is most needed is very much at the administration level. I mean, that's usually the biggest barrier, the biggest impediment to making structural change happens at that level. That's at least what we encounter. And I will say also that it's just much worse in Canada than it is in the U.S. I hope that's not too controversial. Vast majority of our customers, including hundreds of institutional, university-wide clients, are in the U.S. We hardly have any in Canada. It took us 8 years to get a deal with the University of Toronto, and it's still, barely there. We still don't have a deal with University of Waterloo, my school. Those changes have to happen at the administrative institutional level. I mean, one of the reasons why we're not focusing on K-12 now is because the product would work great in K-12. We have no idea how to sell into K-12. It's these sort of political enterprise sales that take, sometimes decades. And I think that really does hold back progress at different educational levels and, across institutions.
Carlos?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have 2 points. One is train the trainer. It's a concept that we talk about a lot. So there's a lot of ed tech focus on the learner, and then it gets in some cases gets thrown to a school, and then the teacher is like, what do I do with this? And there's not enough sometimes effort into train the trainer into new technologies and how to use it the best way. So I think that's one, and I think that's easier. And I echo what Mike was saying about the administrative and regulatory burden on a school. So I was talking to the president of a very renowned college in Canada, or in Ontario, and he was explaining to me that from the moment that they conceive a course to the moment that the course goes live is 8 years. Yeah, 8 years. So in technology, that's like what, like 50? I don't know. So in any event, the problem is that they are in such a tight box that it's very, very hard to be nimble and adaptive. So it really goes beyond that. Is really policy and regulation, so which is a bigger and broader issue.
Sounds good. Marlene?
Yeah, well, we've been talking a lot about higher ed. Naturally, that's where the conversation has evolved. But, you know, in K-12, and I think the gentleman was from a school board, I think, you know, the challenge is implementing new approaches to teaching and learning and technologies requires space in the curriculum. It requires pedagogical changes, commitment to making those changes. There's not a lot of room in the curriculum right now to allow for that. So what we're trying to do is figure out, in partnership with teachers, how do we create activities that integrate with the curriculum that they could use in the classroom? How do we better empower teachers so they could develop, you know, new uses of technology? And quite frankly, one of the big challenges too is not a lot of the schools are equipped with the infrastructure. You know, classrooms, I have a daughter, she's 10 years old, and she's in 5th grade, and she has, I think they share 5 iPads within a particular classroom. So what more and more we're focused on is maybe doing digital for projection in front of the classroom, or doing whiteboard activities that we can give to teachers. So at least we're stepping in the right direction, preparing students for digital when they get to secondary and post-secondary. So it's so complex, and there are so many challenges to making it move faster, but I think every little step and every little thing we could do counts.
I would say the solution is actually, you know, pretty simple. Put more budget responsibility in the hands of teachers,
Right.
departments, lower down, because everything is controlled so much at the centralized level, makes it impossible for anyone to implement any kind of changes. So I think that's the biggest struggle that we're seeing, and why we took this technology that we built and said, you know what, we're going to go to students and faculty and get adoption at that level. Because if we tried to go top down, we wouldn't have had a business. None of this would exist here.
Jeremy?
I would say you have to be careful about that model, because we've seen that happen in New York City, where they went from a very centralized model to a very decentralized model, and now no one could do anything because they've got $50 to work with, right? So it was.
I was there this morning. It is chaos.
Yeah. So there's pros and cons to that. I think I'll reiterate once more, though, the need to invest in support for teachers, professional development. I've never met a teacher that doesn't want to improve personalization of the learning experience for their students and improve outcomes. And so if you can show them a path to do that, and technology is part of that path, you know, helping to reduce that fear. I've been following Twitter feeds this week of teachers who are saying, well, I don't want to put any content into D2L because D2L then owns all that content, and I don't want to give up my IP. That is absolutely false. That is not true. And it is just a lack of information, a lack of training, a lack of investment and support for teachers. So I'll continue to push on that. And we've also built out a whole bunch of different recommendations. For those who haven't seen our white papers, we've produced a series of 3 white papers. You can just go to d2l.com/future of work. You can see all of them there. There's actually our most recent one that was released last month. It's just at reception. There's some hard copies if you want to grab a copy. But a lot of these things are kind of outlined. This is a thought leadership piece that we put out. The ideas in there are really to recommendations to education institutions, to administration, to policymakers, and to others. So I would encourage you to take a look, and we'd love your feedback if you have any.
Thanks. One last question? Okay, 3 people. Do we want to do a quick round of, so let's have everybody ask.
He was first. Are you sure? He's acquiescing. Oh.
Okay, we'll do all 3 questions
Okay,
at once,
it's
and then we'll
Michael.
just.
I can only
Right?
stay till 5 o'clock, so.
Hard stop at 6.
Really a terrific conversation, and thank you all so much. Michael, you opened the box of the U.S., and this is not my question, but it's my comment. They also have over $1 trillion in student debt, right? So we got to look at that. But my actual question is really not about the future of work, but the future of higher ed. And I'm thinking about the future of higher ed, and I'm going to say colleges in particular. I don't know much about universities and how they function. I do know corporate education and higher ed. Everything you do can lead to career success, right? Like all the systems and products that you are offering right now. You can say, okay, in a college, because their mission is learning for career success, most of what you have can actually replicate or duplicate a learning experience that exists now. What's your prediction on what a college in Canada might look like in the next 10 years?
Want to cut it? Okay, we'll cut it at that. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I thought you were going to say, do you think that colleges are going to exist? Most certainly they will, and what we do doesn't replace what the instructor does. So we supplement what the instructor can do, whether it's in an in-person setting or an online setting. I think the colleges will, my personal take off Pearson Record is that with the demand for more online short courses, micro-certifications, boot camps, credentials, I think colleges probably have the opportunity to expand more quickly to meet that market demand. So I think colleges are going to play an even more important role as we move forward. I think you're going to see a lot of people that went for the 4-year university degree come back and start recertifying in different ways, going back to college.
Yeah, I think the future of higher education looks much more like colleges than it does traditional universities. I think over the last 20 or 30 years, there was this massive over-indexing of everybody's got to go to university. And I think now the realization is like, maybe not everyone has to go to university. Maybe that's not the right model for everybody. And so you're seeing these online schools, boot camps, all of that popping up to basically supplement the skills that people should have learned either in university or in a different context. And I think colleges have been more aligned with that than traditional universities. So I think traditional universities are going to become smaller and enrollments are probably going to go down, and much more focus is going to be placed on the sort of very specific skills-focused types of education that colleges or boot camps or online schools provide.
Yeah, I think they're going to look dramatically different, in my opinion, and some will survive, some won't, because I see some that are really adapting and embracing technology, blended environments, and really keeping up with the pace. But the other thing that I see that hasn't been mentioned is I'll see them way more integrated with corporate. Like they're starting to work much better with corporate, preparing people really for what is needed.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing that I see a part of universities just being a handful of them, and maybe more bigger colleges with a broader offer of shorter careers.
Yeah, I think it's hard to generalize, right? Because there's obviously maybe a bell curve of innovation and how these institutions operate, but we've seen a huge amount of innovation happening in the community college sector around the world. Community colleges have always had much closer relationships with employers, right? Most of their program development is done with a program advisory board that's made up of employers, generally from the local area. So they're attuned to the local demand in terms of what employers are looking for in their graduates, and they have huge high employment rates of their graduates as well. So, and in Canada, I don't know if you guys have heard this statistic, but 25% of community college students already have a university degree. Mm-hmm. So 1 in 4 community college students have a university degree, and they're going there for maybe what we call last mile training, right, to actually be employable. So I think they've got that working for them, and I think there's a huge opportunity for colleges in this future of work and this upskilling. I think we'll see them participate more in the ongoing lifelong learning than just in kind of diploma and certificate programs. Mm-hmm. And also kind of the idea of stackable credentials that might contribute to broader macro credentials, either at the college or that would parlay into university degree diploma programs. But I think there's innovation happening everywhere. I think the colleges have a huge opportunity. I think universities do if they can adapt. And they have a little bit further to go and a different operating environment to work within in terms of the autonomy of administration to do top-down changes, right? So So I think it's exciting times regardless, and I think there's huge opportunities for our education system. They just need, we need to help catalyze that change for them.
I mean, what's interesting is I own a private career college, so I sort of can respond from personal experience, and we have been adapting Lighthouse Labs almost constantly in a way that, as Marlene suggested, a university or a community college even couldn't. I think our polytechnics are models within the system of innovation, so to speak, but it's remarkable also how even the polytechnics in Canada are hamstrung by a lot of risk aversion and a lot of, to some extent, government regulation that is not holding back their American counterparts. And so looking at even the alternative financial models, right? If you could have a subscription to School for Life, it might open up a lot more flexibility for those community colleges to deliver education in a very different manner, or, as is the case for most boot camps in the US, if the cost of the boot camp itself was funded by the employer while you're in the boot camp, that obviates the risk up front. This has been an amazing panel. I really, really appreciate all of you coming together. Thank you all for coming. Let's keep this conversation going, online or offline, and I look forward to seeing you at future Canadian Club events.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Jeremy, Carlos, Marlene, and Mike, on behalf of the Canadian Club Toronto, please accept our deepest thanks for demonstrating what collaboration, competition, and excellence looks like in practice. So congratulations. Your insights and real-life examples gave us a lot of food for thought. The fourth industrial revolution brings with it opportunities and challenges. As you so convincingly stated, entrepreneurial responses are in the order of the day. So healthy competition to address the skills shortage and the need to retrain segments of the labor market just makes good sense. We've got exceptional homegrown entrepreneurs who are leading the way. We appreciate your vision and your can-do attitude. Thank you so much. We wish you all continued success. And Jake, thanks for skillfully engaging the panelists in the important conversation today. And we learned a little bit about everything, not just LinkedIn. Thank you so much. And one little housekeeping note. My phone is somewhere in this room. If you find a random phone, it's got a cartoon on the back of it of a brown-haired girl, just hand it over to us in case you see it, so thank you in advance. And I would also like to thank Pearson again for sponsoring today's event. We really appreciate the support, and for Top Hat for inviting us to share their space. Thank you. I also want to remind you today was live streamed. You can go back and visit it on our website anytime. Thank you to VVC for live streaming and for MediaEvents.ca for housing all our videos. We appreciate their support, and we hope to see you all again soon. Enjoy your day. Thanks.